I want to talk about is this. I often hear Muslims, and I'm a Muslim, for those people who don't know, they often want to say that Islam is a religion of peace. Whenever you hear about these tragedies, you have these speakers who come out and say that Islam is a religion of peace. And I understand where they're coming from. I understand why they're saying that. But I beg to differ with their description of Islam as a religion of peace. Muslims want peace in the world. Muslims strive for peace. Muslims greet each other with peace be upon you. The base of the word Islam includes the word for peace. And the same is true for the word Muslim as well. And one of the attributes of God in Islam is peace. But when you look at the history of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when you study that history, you study a history of battles. When you study the history of the caliphs following Muhammad, peace be upon him, you are studying a history of violence, a history of warfare, a history of conflicts, both internal and external. When you look at the history of Muslim empires, you are studying a history of conquest. And it's not always the case that great Muslim societies engaged in warfare, but it is frequently the case. Many great empires are expanded through conquest, through war, and through violence. When you look at the history of the modern day Saudi Arabia, when you look at what the Wahhabis did to other Muslims in terms of killing people, in terms of taking their property and enslaving people, when you look at that history, you can't say that Islam is a religion of peace. War is a part of the history of Islam, just like war is a part of the history of Judaism, just like war is a part of the history of Christianity. Islam, like other religions, governs all conduct that human beings are engaged in, including war. Including war. There are rules to war, and I'm going to get to that point in a second. But when you look at that history, it is difficult to make the argument that Islam is a religion of peace. When you look at all the violence that has been carried out in the name of Islam, you cannot say that Islam is a religion of peace. You just can't. You can't make a strong argument that it's a religion of peace. Now, of course, there have been situations where Muslims have, made peace. That's what we strive for, to make peace, both within and without. But Islamic history is filled with violence, just like histories of other groups of people is filled with violence. So that violence contradicts this assertion that Islam is a religion of peace. And, I understand that people will say, they may say, those people weren't following Islam, those people who engaged in war and all this and that. And I get that to an extent, like with these terrorist attacks, that's contrary to Islam, because you're not supposed to commit these kinds of atrocities against innocent people, against women and children people who are not combating you, people who are non-combatants. So for that reason, you can say that, you know, that those people are in clear violation of Islam through their practices. But that's quite a different thing from saying that Islam is a religion of peace. Because there are verses, ayats in the Quran that talk about war, that outline the rules for war, the rules for combat. There are ayats that talk about how Muslims are called to wage jihad, to strive with their goods and their persons against the enemies of Islam. There's nothing in there about pacifism, even though there are verses throughout the Quran about mercy. You know, there are verses that encourage peace over war, that encourage forgiveness. But there are also, you know, as I've said before, verses calling people to wage war. And not just an internal war, but an actual physical war. So for those reasons, you know, I just want to make it plain. Islam, just like many other faiths, is not a religion of peace. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, you know, because Islam governs all aspects of life, including war. Islam advocates self-defense. So that's all I have to say about that. You know, tell me what you think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.